Hello everyone, so this is the second set of lecture videos that covers the nervous system. In this lecture video we're going to be talking about brain association areas as well as cranial nerves. So this is the actual frontal section, okay, or a coronal section of, in this case, the cerebrum, and the cerebrum is the upper portion of your brain. And there are two main areas of the brain, and that's the cortex, okay, the gray matter, and the actual white matter in this case. And if you can see, folks, again, this is gray matter and white matter here, and there's other deeper gray matter, which is called the cerebral nuclei. The main difference, again, as I mentioned previously in the first nervous system lecture, is gray matter are neuron cell bodies or neuron processes that are not covered with myelin. So this is, if you think about these are areas in which the heads of the neurons actually live in, the gray matter. The white matter, on the other hand, folks, is the actual, in this case, the wiring, right? This is actually the axons, which are myelinated. So again, in the case of the central nervous system, the myelination is facilitated by a neuroglial cell called oligodendrocytes. In the peripheral nervous system, myelination is actually, in this case, performed by a different cell, a neuroglial cell called the Schwann cell. All right. So this is very important. If you have ever, like, if you have a laptop, a computer, or any other instrument right now that actually does calculation or anything like that, gray matter is the actual central processing unit, and the white matter are the actual wiring that connects stuff together. All right. So that's one of the main distinctions between gray matter and white matter. Another important thing is, if I can find my arrow here, is you can see that there are bumps in the actual cerebrum. Okay, the bumps in the cerebrum, folks, are called, in this case, gyrus. Okay, and the dips or the grooves in the actual brain is actually called sulcus. Okay, gyrus, sulcus. Plural for gyrus is gyri, and plural for sulcus is sulci. All right. So very, very important again. And the main difference between the colors is because, again, one has myelin, the other one does not. All right. This is actually the basis of MRIs, especially for if you have traumatic brain injury. Or so what happens is, if you if you happen to get like kicked in the head or fall off a horse or whatever that would be, when there is cell death means to say that the head of your neurons, your neuron cell body, is killed. So what happens is, if a region here, let's say if all the neuron cell bodies here are dead, what happens then, folks, is then you can see the white matter underneath, and that's actually what you're looking for in MRIs. Right? So there are, now, since the brain is brain and spinal cord are very, very important, there's actually many ways that actually the brain and spinal cord protection. So again, how do you protect yourself from traumatic brain injuries? The skeletal protection is obviously number one. The skeletal protection is the cranium and the vertebral canal protects physical injury, physical trauma to your brain and spinal cord. The other thing is called the meninges, and meninges is just connective matter that actually wraps the brain and spinal cord. And there are three. In this case, we have the dura matter, which is actually the outermost, the most superficial of all three matters. Then you have the arachnoid matter in the middle, and the pia matter is actually directly, in this case, on top of the cerebral cortex. Okay, and again, the reason why you have those is for a secondary barrier to the skeletal protection. Then you have cerebrospinal fluid. Now, cerebrospinal fluid is a very viscous, very sweet, clear fluid that actually circulates in the ventricles of the brain, okay, in which you have like many, like you actually have lateral ventricles, right? The fourth like in this case, the third ventricle. And what it happens, folks, is it actually protects your brain from jostling around. What I would like for you to do is, if you ever have time to do this, is you boil an egg, okay? And you put it inside, and you boil 2 eggs actually, just so that this is a better experiment. And what you do is you put them inside, in this case, I know, like a drinking, like one of your like drinking bottles, okay? And what happens is, if you shake an egg in a very, very dry container, what happens is you can see then that the egg gets smashed around, okay? There's a lot of trauma involved there. What happens, however, is if you fill that, in this case, one of your drinking bottles with water, and you actually put the egg inside, when you shake the egg, what happens is the actual water then, in this case, kind of dissipates the force exerted on the egg. Okay, so that's actually the purpose of the cerebrospinal fluid. Last but not least, one of the other ways that you actually protect the brain and spinal cord is the blood and the brain's spinal cord barrier. And again, I mentioned already before that the astrocytes are the dominant, in this case, the dominant and the dominant cells that actually does this. And again, the astrocytes are actually neuronal cells. What they do, folks, is they actually extend one arm out to the blood and they extend the other arm out to the neuron. And what they do is they only let nutrients in. Okay, so when a nutrient, like when you need glucose, then it's actually the astrocyte that actually lets glucose pass through, all right, and actually feeds the neuron in this case. This is actually one of the reasons why it's problematic to actually target drugs directly to the brain or spinal cord. And the reason why that is if you take a drug, let's say for a headache, what happens is most of the substances do not cross the blood-brain barrier. Right? And so one of the ways that we do this is we actually like pump up in this case, the dosage, right? To make sure that some crosses behind. But obviously what happens then is you have some toxic effects and you have some severe side effects when you actually have a high dosages of a medication in which only a very, very small minority actually crosses the blood and the brain spinal. This is also very, very important to protect you from, in this case, viruses as well as bacterial infections, okay? Now, jumping into a different topic. Now we're going to talk about the function and association brain regions. Functional tells you, that's a self-explanatory, it just tells you what it does. And association means it connects multiple functional areas. All right. So we have the motor, like in this case, this is the frontal lobe. The reason it's called the frontal lobe is because the frontal bone is directly, in this case, on top of it, superficial to it. Parietal lobe. Okay. So all of these lobes are actually named after the bone that sits on top. Okay, very important thing, folks. There's a central sulcus. The central sulcus, again, remember that I mentioned before that sulcus means grooves, and there's this red-colored region. This is called the motor. Okay, this is the primary motor gyrus, and you see the blue here. This is called the primary sensory gyrus. Okay, motor means again efferent, so this means to say it's voluntary movements or involuntary movements of muscular or muscles or glands. Okay, and then you actually have the sensory cortex, which is sensations, right? And when we talk about sensations, folks, the parietal lobe is most of the time responsible for general sensations. Okay, so there are two different types of sensations. We might as well cover this right now. One of them is called special senses. The special senses are, vision, right, hearing, taste. Okay. And then you have general sensation. Pain is a general sensation. You can feel pain all over your body, right? You cannot see all over. You cannot see from the bottom part of your feet, right? Well, that's why it's called special sensation. Pain, in this case, equilibrium, like a little bit of bound, not a little bit bound, but proprioception, meaning to say that you being aware of where you are in position in space. Touch, right? So those are general sensations, okay? Now we might as well talk about association areas. Why are there association areas? Let's look at this one. Gustatory cortex is the functional area for taste, and the olfactory cortex is in this case, the functional area for smell. Okay, and as you can see, they're right next to each other. Well, what connects them, folks, when it's not shown here, is an association area, which associates them together. This is why we taste and smell at the same time. So they go together. Right? So it's not an accident, okay? So again, so why do we have, if you look at this one right now, you actually have auditory cortex, which is in this case hearing, and the visual cortex, which is actually obviously seeing, and you talk, you read, guess what? They are associated again. So those are anything that connects two different functional areas of the brain are called association brain regions. All right? Now, this is very, very important. So every single lobe of the brain have generalized functions. Now, there are certain overlaps, but we're going to generalize a little bit, okay? So I want you to make sure that you are aware of this specific, very, very important slide in this case, in your PowerPoint slides. Make sure that you understand which each lobe generally does, okay? So temporal lobe, you need to understand, like, okay, auditory, hearing, olfactory, smell, all right? cerebellum, memories of previously learned movement patterns. That means like sports, okay, brushing your teeth. Those are what's stored there. Coordination, balance. The brainstem, very autonomic functions, breathing, swallowing, heart rate, okay. And the brainstem was obviously the region of your brain on the bottom part, okay. It's kind of like the trunk of the tree if you want to think about it this way. Occipital lobe, vision primarily, parietal lobe again, sensations, general sensations, and then frontal lobe, voluntary and involuntary movement, right? This is also where most of your higher cognitive skills are, right? Decision making, planning, personality. This is one of the reasons why if you actually have like a lesion in your frontal lobe, you actually have personality problems. I don't know. There was this guy who I already forgot his name. He his frontal lobe got smashed up during like an accident with dynamite. This was in the early days, and this is actually how they decided like what functions actually each lobe does. Very, very important. All right, please. This is a very, very important slide here. Finishing off, there are actually 12 cranial nerves that actually come out from the brain stem and the beginning parts of your spinal cord, and most of the time it's the brain stem. There are 12 cranial nerves, okay, and the 12 cranial nerves, folks, I'm going to tell you right now is you only need to know, in this case I'm going to tell you, you need to know optic nerve, okay, now cranial nerve 2, you need to know olfactory, cranial nerve 1, you need to know 8, which is in this case the vestibulocochlear nerve, okay, that is actually for balance and vision, all right. The vagus nerve, number 10, that actually in this case controls, in this case initiates, in this case sense motor, all right, and sensations from the actual most of your internal organs. So there is a key here. If you see a red line, that means there's a sensory function. That means you're getting sensations, number 1, from the nose. So the sense of smell in this case is mediated by the olfactory nerve or cranial nerve 1. However, if you look at, in this case, facial nerve 7, right? Facial nerve 7, folks, has a motor function, right? I hope that you guys can see this, right? But it also has, like there are some also that have mixed fibers. So one of them again is vagus nerve. That means to say it sends impulses that actually mediates the movement of your internal organs, but then it also receives sensation, pain, all of that stuff from those things. So when you have a blue and red fiber, that means to say that you have a sensory and a motor function. All right. Vestibulocochlear is absolutely all sensory. Okay. In this case, right. So again, please make sure. Here you go. Cranial nerve 7 again, facial nerve. It also has a sensory function because you can see that there's actually a red fiber that comes out of it, and it has a sensory portion also for your in this case the anterior part of your tongue. Okay, which is going to come up for very, very important for sensation for taste. Trigeminal nerve, folks, is in this case sensory. Okay, so if someone slaps you, the reason why you can feel that pain is because of the trigeminal nerves. Okay, but it also innervates the muscles of mastication. So your buccinator muscle, your masseter muscle to chew. Okay, so if you want to chew, you also need this trigeminal. The reason why it's called trigeminal nerve, just as an FYI, is because it has 3 branches that comes out of it. Okay, accessory nerve. Okay, so you guys can read this on your own again, but again, olfactory, optic, vestibulocochlear nerve, vagus nerve. Okay, hypoglossal, all right, and facial nerves are going to be most of the important nerves that you need to know about. Cranial nerves.